How's it going? It's a video that I've been meaning to do for a while, and something happened in the last couple days that made me think about it more, and it's something that I owe to someone. I need to do that. So, first of all, gotta have my obligatory. It's the new winter Red Bull. It's delicious. So, there's a person that, when you're in prison, you come across people that do different things. They contribute in various ways. Some are good, some are bad, some are just kind of neutral. They're just there. But this guy was definitely a positive influence on not only my life while I was in custody, but also my life after I was released. And that's the debt, I guess, that I feel like that I owe to him. So I'm going to say his first name. His name was Bobby, and he was an older guy. He had charges that he was serving prison time on that aren't even crimes anymore in Kentucky. That's how old of a charge they are. Warehouse robbing and storehouse breaking. Those are antiquated names for basically burglary from the 70s and 80s, mid to early 70s, and then late 70s and into the 80s. So I met him when I was at Blackburn, and it was a minimum security facility that I was at right before I was released. I was there for about 2 years. So when I first got to Blackburn, he was kind of a cantankerous individual, grumpy, curmudgeon, another word that comes to mind. But Bobby was a legal aid in prison and had been for a number of years. And he had filed several cases in different courts of appeals, and it wasn't just here in Kentucky. It was around the country. He had done prison time in Leavenworth, Kansas, at the federal facility there. So he'd been around, to say the least. But when I met Bobby, he was a legal aid at Blackburn. I got moved there in 2012, and I have to think he was probably there at the time, or may have arrived just after I got there in late 2012. So, in 2013, I was served with adoption papers on the day that I graduated from the legal aid training course in LaGrange at Luther Luckett. And I was actually sent to Luther Luckett from Blackburn to take the legal aid class that I completed, and I was served with those adoption papers the day that I finished that class and was due to come back to Blackburn. It sent me into a tizzy, to say the very least, and I was very upset, very, very angry, very confused. Didn't really know what to do. Had kind of been anticipating it. So that's not fair. I'll walk that back a little bit. I kind of planned on it, anticipated that it was going to happen at some point, potentially. That was kind of the worst case scenario, and then that did happen. But the fact that I completed the legal aid class, I felt like helped me to an extent, and the fact that it put me in a better frame of mind legally to do some things, to actually affect some change from it, was also a good thing. So when I got back to Blackburn, I had made notes the night that I got it, went through it, and when you're not really versed in the law and you get a bunch of legal papers, you tend to go through them, and your anger and ego and those kinds of things, they try to find everything wrong with what you've been sent, and you get distracted. You get distracted pretty easily. So, I had a very contested adoption hearing telephonically because it wasn't very practical to transport me from Kentucky to Indiana, where this adoption hearing was going to be held physically. So the court did that. The entire time before this adoption hearing in July of 2013 is when it happened. I'd asked for attorneys repeatedly. I'd stated my lack of money indigency at the time, and the court had acknowledged the indigency, but they had not. They acknowledged by omission. They didn't answer the question when I asked about an attorney. So the adoption hearing happened. They were granted the adoption, and I had the notice of appeal in. I had it ready the day after the adoption hearing happened. So filed the notice of appeal and was going through that process. The thing that I got hung up on was the facts about what they were alleging, and not the big thing that mattered. The big thing that mattered was the fact that I'd asked for an attorney by all rights, and every stretch of the imagination, I should have been granted an attorney when I asked for it, due to the significance of that hearing and what that meant, but also fundamental fairness and due process and those kinds of concepts that come into play. And I was talking over everything that had happened, and Bobby said, "Look, you're arguing about the details, and you're missing the big concept that you need to really be focusing on." And that took me back. And he made some notes, and he told me some things, and helped me to understand more of the framework of the argument I needed to have. And so I went that route with it. I still have every shred of paperwork related to anything to do with that, because for lots of reasons. But eventually that adoption appeal and that process and that briefing back and forth between myself and the plaintiffs and the court and all of that resulted in the opinion in regarding the adoption of KW 21 Northeast 3rd 96. That was in the Indiana Court of Appeals in 2014. That's the case citation for my daughter's adoption case. And in that case, I am the MW and she is the KW. That resulted in an overturning of that result, and then remanded the adoption to the lower court to determine some issues. And then ultimately that adoption was denied on the merits versus just another disposition or another approval, basically. There's all kinds of procedural things that happened, and judges that were recused and were asked to be recused, and then changes of venue and bar complaints and judicial conduct complaints on the judge and all kinds of other things. But all of that aside, the ultimate result was that the adoption was overturned because it should never have happened, and the judges agreed with my contention. But that contention came from this guy Bobby that I knew in prison. When I got out, I was talking to Bobby because he had a tow truck business. He talked about that for years, from 2012 when I first got to Blackburn until 2015 when I got out. And when he got out a few months before I did. But he talked about having this tow truck and doing this again. He would draw designs for the graphics, what he wanted to have on his tow truck when he got out. And so I remembered that. And when he first got out, he was on pretty super intensive parole because he had been violated he came back because of a DUI and a parole violation. The parole officer that he had when he had the DUI just basically advised him to go ahead and do the alcohol classes and those kinds of things he needed to do. He completed those classes, and by the time he had completed that, several months later, a year later, he turned those completion paperwork and stuff from those classes into his new parole officer because the parole officer had changed. And the parole officer said, "I hope those are not what I think they are," meaning the completion papers from this alcohol class. And he said, "Yeah." And she told him to turn around and put his hands behind his back, and she violated his parole at that time. So that's the reason, that's how I came into contact with him in the first place. So he gets out first. I got out. There's a rule when you're on parole, you can't have any kind of associations with other convicted felons and those kinds of things. And Bobby lived right across the street pretty much at the time from one of the probation and parole offices. Bobby wasn't into drugs. That isn't what he went to prison for. It isn't what I went to prison for. And he invited me over to his house one night after he'd been out for a while, and offered to cook me a steak, and I don't really know how to take that. I don't know, but one of the best steaks I've ever had. He could definitely cook. And then, we met up a couple times and had lunch and stuff and would talk about things. He was very political. Bobby was very political and opinionated, and he definitely had some different political ideologies than I did. And we agreed to disagree, and that was because we both respected each other. People can't seem to do that, and recent events that have happened can test that ability to talk and communicate, but not totally go to war with each other personally over an opinion. So Bobby was he'd had a lot of experiences in life, and I really thought a lot of him, and still do. I was talking to him one day though, and I said, "Hey, do you know anyone that has any cars for sale?" Because I'd just been out for over a year and needed a car. He said, "Well, I don't know anyone that's got a car for sale, but I know a guy that might give you a job and then give you a car with that." I said, "Okay, I'm interested." So I got the information for this individual and contacted him and got to working. And that's how I started doing traffic control for utility companies. I did that job as a self-employed independent contractor type job for a number of years. And a lot of things happened with that job as far as the years and the pandemic and the changes and those kinds of things. And I stepped away from that a couple years ago due to some different reasons, mostly just personal reasons with the guy that was running that company at the time. So, a couple years ago, about a year and a half ago, actually, I was looking online and I saw was an obituary, and it was Bobby's, and so I made a point to find his daughter. He talked about her a lot while we were in prison together. He loved her very much, and he named his towing company after her. And I wanted to pass along some stories about Bobby that I remember. And I also wanted to let her know about the adoption and what happened with all that. One of the things I made a point to do as well when I came over and had that steak that he made is I brought him a copy of the court opinion from the adoption appeal. And I told him, I said, "Bobby, this appeal is just as much credit to you that it is to me. I mean, I'm the one that wrote it, but you were instrumental. Without his input and help, I would never have been able to do what I did because I was too busy focusing on the other things that were tangential that didn't really matter and that wouldn't have gotten any kind of result." Thankfully, he was able to kind of focus my efforts, and that ultimately resulted in what it resulted in that opinion. So I wanted him to know that he did help tremendously, and that credit for that opinion belonged to him as well. So I was talking to his daughter, and I asked what happened, and apparently the individual that he had connected me with the traffic job years before, he had went to this individual's shop, and he felt sick. And Bobby was very opinionated in a lot of political things, and one of those things was the coronavirus, COVID, SARS-CoV-2, Wuhan flu, whatever you want to call it. He was very opinionated about that vaccine, and he didn't trust it. He didn't like it. Like I said, Bobby was an older guy. He was a bigger guy. And so he had some issues, some health issues, even underlying all of that. He smoked a lot, and he was an older guy. He was a bigger guy, and those all kind of played into it. But he went to this individual's shop one day and wasn't feeling very well, and got to the point where he couldn't breathe very well. This individual, thankfully, called an ambulance. But before the ambulance got there, him and some other people that were around Bobby decided to perform a very very heinous act. They took the money that he had out of his wallet. They robbed him, basically. And he died in the hospital a few days later. And I found out about his death sometime after it had happened. And just a couple days ago, I was sitting at the place that I'm at, that I've been at for a couple of months. I'll probably make a video about that here at some point. But I'm sitting down and I've been shuffling it since I've started the video. It's one of his business cards, and I'm quite sure that it was probably placed here by me when me and Bobby were talking a lot more. And has his cell phone number and the name of the company, towing company that he had. So one of the things that same individual that he went to the day that he went to the hospital tried to do was tried to steal his tow truck and any other property that he had, because that's what some people do when you're at your weakest, you're most vulnerable. They take advantage of you. And you know, I haven't seen Bobby in a couple of years, and you know, the thing that we all know as adults is with death is that it's never going to happen again in this life. And I'm not going to get into a thing about that, but I am immeasurably, incredibly thankful to Bobby for knowing him, for meeting him, and for having him help me in something that he could help me with, and he was uniquely qualified to do that with because of the time that he had spent in custody, because of the relationship that he had kept with his daughter through all those years of being in and out of prison. And then just the fact that his humanity was one of the things that I'll never forget, because you can't be in that kind of environment and lose your humanity and still offer to help people, especially people that have a merit, reason, claim in something that you know a lot about. And Bobby knew a lot about the law. He could cite cases that were recent because he kept himself current on cases, criminal and civil, wasn't just criminal. Bobby was very smart. He was very hardworking, and he was a very honest person the years that I knew him. You don't get to prison by being very honest, so let's be honest with that. But between me and him, he was very honest. He was a very honest person. And I made sure to let his daughter know my experiences with him and those positive things, and that he did help someone. And so hopefully that's the memory that she has of him instead of the other bad things. But Bobby, I think the world of you, and I miss you.